Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a huge question. Is history just one single story? Or can the exact same events be told in completely different, even contradictory ways? We're going to unpack this whole idea using the incredible and complex story of modern India. So, let's start with the big question. Is history just a list of facts and dates we're supposed to memorize? Or is it really a collection of stories shaped by whoever is telling them? To figure this out, we're not going to start with some epic battle or a famous treaty. Nope, we're going to start with something much more, well, normal. A single government document. So picture this. A historian gets their hands on this one file. It's full of boring stuff, right? Budgets, curriculum ideas, location plans. By itself, it's just data. But in the hands of a historian, this one file can become the seed for a massive story. And here's the kicker. The story they tell depends entirely on the lens they're looking through. Okay, first up, the colonial perspective. A British historian from back in the day might look at this file and say, see, this is proof of our noble, civilizing mission. For them, the story is super simple. The British government is kindly bringing progress and education to the people. It's a story of generosity. But then an Indian nationalist historian looks at that exact same file and tells a totally different story. They'd start asking questions like, wait a minute, what's in this curriculum? Is it just designed to stamp out traditional Indian knowledge and push Western culture? They might look at the tiny budget and say, this school isn't for everyone, it's just for a handful of rich elites. Suddenly, it becomes a story about cultural control. And then a feminist historian comes along and adds a whole other critical layer. They're asking questions the first two might not have even thought about. Are girls even allowed to go to this school? Is it built in a place where girls can actually travel safely? Are there separate, secure bathrooms for them? The same file now becomes a story about gender, access, and power. One file, three completely different histories. Wild, right? So that brings us to our first major perspective and how this all builds out, the colonial approach. And you got to remember, for a very, very long time, this was the official story. This is what was taught in schools and written in the history books. So what even is colonialism? Well, it's not just one country ruling another, not by a long shot. It's a total system. The whole point is to control the colony's economy, its resources, and even its culture, all to benefit the country in charge. It's about total control. So to justify this system, colonial historians, guys like James Mill, they built this really powerful narrative. They argued that before the British showed up, India wasn't really a unified country. It was just this chaotic mess of warring kingdoms. They claimed that Indians were used to harsh, despotic rulers and, well, just weren't capable of governing themselves. So in their telling, British rule wasn't an invasion, it was a rescue mission. And this whole ideology was captured perfectly in that famous phrase, the white man's burden. It completely reframed what was happening. It turned an act of conquest and economic exploitation into some kind of noble, self-sacrificing duty to bring civilization to everyone else. Of course, a story that powerful is going to get an equally powerful response, and that's exactly what happened. Indian thinkers, writers, and historians started to build a powerful counter-narrative to take back their own history and define their own identity. And wow, when you put these two stories side by side, the clash is just incredible. Where the colonial views saw pre-British India as total chaos, nationalists pointed to a glorious past with massive, unified empires. Where the British claimed they were on a civilizing mission, nationalists saw economic ruin and cultural destruction. And to the idea that Indians couldn't govern themselves, they pointed to a long history of ancient republics and self-rule. You know, one of the most powerful nationalist arguments wasn't just about culture, it was about money, cold, hard cash. Thinkers like Dadabhai Naoroji developed what's called the drain theory. It's actually really simple, but it was devastating. Step 1, Britain takes cheap raw materials, like cotton, from India. Step 2, they ship it to Britain and manufacture expensive clothes. Step 3, they sell those finished clothes back to the Indian market for a massive profit. India's wealth was literally being drained away. Okay, so we've got the British story and the Indian nationalist story. But that just opens up another, even deeper question. Was the Indian freedom struggle really just one big, unified movement of India versus Britain? I mean, think about it. Was a wealthy Indian factory owner fighting for the same kind of freedom as a poor peasant farmer? Probably not. And this is where two other ways of thinking, the Marxist and the subaltern schools, come into play. They say, to really get what happened, you have to look at the conflicts inside Indian society itself. The Marxist approach brings in this idea of class conflict. It basically argues the movement was split.
On one side, you have the bourgeoisie, the wealthy, elite Indians. Their main goal was to grab political power from the British for themselves. But on the other side, you have the proletariat, the working class. Their struggle wasn't just against the British. They were also fighting exploitation from the Indian elites. So you had two very different fights happening at the exact same time.
Now, building right on that idea, the subaltern school of history goes even farther. The word subaltern basically just means people who are outside the main structures of power. This approach asks, what about the voices of the people who are almost always left out of the official story? The lower castes, tribal communities, poor farmers, and women. What was their story? Historians like Ranjit Guha, who was a huge figure in subaltern studies, made a pretty radical claim. They argued that the real engine of the freedom struggle wasn't the elite leaders writing polite letters. No way. It was the mass movements of ordinary people, the laborers, the peasants, the tram drivers, the ones who took direct action and really shook the foundations of the colonial state. Okay, so we've got all these different, often clashing, ways of seeing the past. The colonial, the nationalist, the Marxist, the subaltern, the feminist. It's a lot, right? So what do we do with all of them? Well, the key thing to remember is you don't have to pick just one. The best way to think about this is like having a toolkit. Each approach is a different tool, a different lens. The colonial lens shows us exactly how imperialism justified itself. The nationalist lens reveals how a national identity was forged. The Marxist lens exposes the class tensions bubbling under the surface. The subaltern lens helps us hear the voices of the forgotten. And the feminist lens highlights the crucial role of gender. None of them tell the whole story alone, but when you use them together, that's when you get a much richer, more complex, and frankly, more honest picture of the past. And look, realizing the history isn't just one story, isn't just some abstract academic exercise, it is an absolutely crucial skill for understanding the world we live in right now, today. It teaches us to be critical thinkers. So the next time you hear any story about the past, whether it's on the news or from a politician, ask yourself, who is telling this story? What do they want me to believe? And maybe the most important question of all, whose voice is missing? Because at the end of the day, history isn't just about what's remembered. It's also about what's been silenced. And uncovering those hidden stories, well, that's where the real work of understanding our past and our present truly begins.